All right, so we're just going to get started since it's past 7:30 already. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Before we start, I just want to introduce, or I have several people introduce themselves really quickly who play a part in what we're going to discuss tonight as well, our team selection process. We have both our VPs of travel with me as well. So Matt and Eric, maybe you can start, followed by Matt. Maybe you guys can quickly introduce yourself as well for those that don't know you yet.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Eric Judka, VP of Girls Travel. Appreciate everyone dialing in. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. We will do our best to get you answers to them. And just looking forward to having Coach Rubin provide information.
Hi, this is Matt Farnbach. I'm the VP of Voice Travel. Like Eric, excited to be here and happy to help in any way I can.
All right, fantastic. So thank you both for doing so. So again, we have plenty of things we want to go through tonight. As we get started, just want to make sure that we're clear on, if you will, the rules of engagement. Not the first time for most, if not all, of course, by now everyone has gone through Zoom meetings or whatnot. So just make sure you're on mute. That way we don't have an additional background noise. You don't have to have your cameras on. You can just listen in. And throughout the presentation, if you have questions that relate directly to something that we're addressing at that point in time, just use the chat function. I'll make sure the VPs of travel are monitoring the chat throughout. That way, if it's related to something that we're discussing at that point, we can address the question right away. We'll also have a Q&A at the end. We'll encourage you to use the opportunity to ask questions since you're tuning in tonight as well. I do my best to explain everything clearly as well as concise, of course, but I'm familiar with the process. I know what's ahead of us. And for someone that may not be familiar with it, it may not be as clear. So ask questions, please, throughout. So moving forward, I would like to hear from you guys actually what you hope to get clarity on. I have at this point an agenda for tonight's meeting, but based on needs of our audience, I may emphasize certain parts of the presentation, spend a little bit more time on certain parts of the team selection process. So if you can use the chat and maybe in a couple of words describe what you're hoping to get clarity on, I'll give everyone a minute or so to do so. So again, what do you hope to get clarity on? Just use the chat function, please. I'll wait patiently before I move on. All right. All right. I see one question that has come in so far. Something we can hopefully address once we talk about the U13 specifically. Something in regards to the tryouts. So we will also provide you with information on that broken down by age group in a little bit, as well as specific age groups and genders. So we'll touch on all of that. So it seems like everything that I plan on addressing will address the majority of the questions asked so far. If at any point, and I said it earlier, if at any point during the presentation you do have a question, just use the chat. I'll make sure our VPs of travel are monitoring the chat and they'll ping me or they'll speak up, better said, when there's a need to address something. All right. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to move forward and we'll touch on everything that has been addressed so far. So the main topics that we're going to discuss tonight, we're going to look back at what was before we look forward to what it is going to be. Obviously, you know, we've all gone through a lot, but there's a couple of things that have impacted our team selection process going into the fall of 2020, as well as, you know, our team selection for the fall of 2021. At some point will also discuss the team selection and the process in place broken down by age group. To be clear, I'll refer to age groups by their by year of birth, because the age group definitions are by year of birth. So, depending on the year of birth of your son, daughter, or multiple children for that matter, that way you hopefully have clarity on what to do. We'll talk about the evaluation process if you're currently in travel. We'll also talk about the evaluation process if you're a non-travel player interested in playing in travel come the fall of 2021 as well. I'll highlight the evaluation criteria that we use to evaluate all the players. And then to finish off, if there are any questions to be asked, we'll make sure they're addressed as well. And hopefully by the end of the night, you have an answer to the questions that you wanted answered, obviously. So moving forward, all right. Looking back, going into the fall of 2020, I touched on it very briefly before, but last year around the same time, a year ago, things looked a lot different. We all have now had to adjust to a new normal, and I've had to deal with the pandemic for a good 13, 14 months. But unfortunately, the processes that we largely depend on to help us form our teams didn't take place in the fall 2020. We didn't know exactly when we were able to return. By the time we did return to the field, there was very little time, as well as a lot of restrictions set forward by the state of New Jersey, the New Jersey Department of Health, as well as guidelines and protocols provided to us by the likes of New Jersey Youth Soccer that made it really challenging to go through the process like we have done in the past. So at that point, we made a decision to go forward with the team selection as we did going into the fall of 2020. We probably had less movement due to a lack of information, to be honest, than you would see in a normal year. But that all helped us form our teams for the fall of 2020 and the spring of 2021, as you probably know by now. That being said, looking forward, we are, and we'll talk you through all of that tonight as well. We are looking to run all our programs accordingly to help us in the process. There are still some changes to some of the programs, and somebody posed the question on that as well, but there are some changes to some of the programs that we have in place because we still have to deal with protocols. There are still rules in place, or protocols and rules in place, guidelines that determine what we have to do, or that basically impact how we do things. But overall, we're in a much better place, thankfully. There's hope on the horizon as well. So we're very, very eager to move forward and make sure that we get all the information we need to help place players accordingly for the fall of 2021 and the spring of 2022. So again, we know what we had to do a couple months ago, or in the summer of 2020. Now, as I said, we also know what we're going to do this spring to make sure teams are selected accordingly, or players are placed accordingly, teams are formed accordingly for the fall of 2021. All right, so before we zoom in on the actual team selection process, I just want to highlight a couple of key objectives, part of our development philosophy that drive a lot of the things that we do, including our team selection process. This will always be our main drive, making sure that our members are given an opportunity to enjoy the experience, make sure it's fun. That's the main reason, as communicated by children, and research has backed it up as well, why they play sports, not just soccer. We want to make sure they have a good experience at whatever program they are, whatever team they play for. It also is well known that children walk away from sports when it stops being fun. And selfishly, I want to make sure that, especially in an early age, but throughout the experience, that it's such a good experience that children want to stick with soccer over maybe other sports as well. So that is definitely one of the things that drives us, as well as the overall objective that we want to develop capable and confident decision makers. Soccer is and will always be a player's game, a game in which the players have to act accordingly based on what happens on the field around them. They got to figure out how to move forward from everything that happens around them. So they got to become capable and confident, both on the ball as well as in their ability to make decisions and execute decisions. So these two things together drive basically everything that we do. That drives, our training methods, or the methodology that we have implemented for our training, as well as how we want to coach and the coaching methods that we utilize when it comes to games. And it even impacts our team selection. All right. For us, it's really important that players are placed accordingly based on their needs. Because, for you to do well, you got to be in an environment where you're able to be successful without being, without being overly challenged. Because again, basically the competition that you play and the players that you play with, it needs to almost fit you like a shoe would fit you as well. It shouldn't be too big, it shouldn't be too small. So again, all of this impacts our training, coaching, and our team selection process. Now, the travel team selection process. Obviously, this is what we're discussing tonight. There's two things that impact our team selection process. The one is actually making sure that everyone is safe. This is largely due to COVID. Obviously, safety is always a priority for us, but this year more than ever, given some of the challenges that we face, we have protocols to follow still. Again, there's hope on the horizon, as I said earlier, but there are still protocols and guidelines in place that we need to follow. So we keep that in mind with all that we do, including our team selection process. And our objective is to gather as much information on all the players interested in playing travel next year to make sure we place them accordingly. And as you find out through the presentation, we gather data through a variety of sources. Right? Our objective is to get as much information as we can to help us in the decision-making process. Obviously, there's still some challenges along the way, but overall, as I said, we're in a much better place than we were a year ago when we didn't have an opportunity to do some of the programs that we're running this spring to help us in the process. So to make sure that everyone is clear on this, I'm going to touch on the selection criteria that we use and to help us in this process. And so they will be age appropriate, but the general guidelines or outline for all this are the same across the board from the incoming U9s all the way through U14, U15. So players will be evaluated on their overall understanding of the game, which again, it will be age appropriate, because what we can expect from a U9 is vastly different from what we can expect from a U14, U15 player for a variety of reasons. When a U14, U15 player obviously should have a greater foundation given the time spent playing the game, but it's also to do with their overall physical development as well as their psychosocial development and even their brain development. At U9, there's certain things we just can't expect of a player yet, because they're, for example, the overall awareness may not be as great because certain parts of the brain aren't developed fully, and it doesn't happen until the U14, U15. So overall understanding of the game is one. Their ability to make decisions under pressure. Soccer is a game, and I spoke about that early on as well. Soccer is a game in which you're asked to make decisions under pressure of an opponent. Decisions are because of what the opponent does, as well as how your teammates behave around you. And the quicker you're able to do that, the less time you need, the more likely you're able to play at a high level. That's often the biggest difference between playing at a lower level and a higher level. The more time you need, right, the more likely you're better off at a slightly lower level to start out, right, to get used to what's happening around you before moving up. With that, we also talk about the ability to execute these decisions, aka the technique. But making a decision is one, being able to execute the decision is another. And we are separating it, but there are definitely linked, because some players are, for example, capable at making decisions but struggle to execute them. Others may be quite good on the ball but struggle to make the right decisions, etc. But these three criteria are key to and a main part of all the evaluations that we do. Now, I want to stress that just running hard or kicking a ball far or any such thing doesn't necessarily guarantee or say that you're a good soccer player. Soccer is more about being in the right place at the right time than just running hard. And that's why we value the three main criteria that I shared with you earlier as well, rather than just saying, my kid can kick the ball very, very far. Right, and we don't want to just, if we would focus on the physical component too much, the chances would be that we are actually going to confuse physical development with the overall development as a soccer player, because there's a big difference between one and the other, right? We want to make sure that we evaluate players based on what they can do, as well as how great their understanding of the game is. So a couple other criteria that are also part of the process, and they need to be highlighted: positive attitude in training and games, effort in training and games, overall commitment, and commitment doesn't mean just showing up to practice sessions, also making the most of practice sessions, perseverance or dealing with challenges, if you will, coachability, how well do you do with the feedback you provided, and overall discipline. Because we all know ability alone is not going to get you where you want to be, where you want to get. In the long run, those that make an effort, are committed, are coachable, those are the ones that are going to succeed. Time and time again, this has been shown, right? Just ability alone or potential is not going to be sufficient. So a combination of the three main criteria that I mentioned earlier, as well as the psychosocial criteria, if you will, are part of the evaluations that we complete on our players. All right, so these are, in a nutshell, our selection criteria. Now, I've showed this this picture before, but I want to touch on it once more. If you look at the picture on the left, or the left side of this picture, if you will, child development in an ideal will be, on a straight line or an upward line all the way through. But as you all know, you all have children yourself. You're interested in their overall development as well as their development as a soccer player. That's why you tuned in for tonight's call. Child development is not a straight line. All right, it has its ups and downs. It has its bumps in the road. Sometimes it goes fast. Sometimes they have to take a step back. Whatever happens, there's no such thing as, from 1 week to the other, from 1 year to the other, it just goes up, up, and up. Sometimes, it slows down a little bit. Sometimes it goes fast. Whatever may happen, all right, along the way, children have to figure out where they are, and with that, then they continue to grow. So most of the players that we're talking about when it comes to travel team selection are anywhere, from the incoming U9s through U14, U15, if you will. But even when players are as old as 15, 16, it's hard to predict where they're gonna end up. To back up that statement, I'll share a good story with you that I came across very recently. This is on a very established player who has represented, and this may not be familiar to you, but who has represented the Danish national team in many games and has played for many prestigious European clubs and is now playing for AC Milan in the Serie A. But when he was a youth player, and he was 16 years of age already, and you think that's quite late in his development, but actually he was 16 years of age. He was the last player added to a roster of the Danish top club FC Midtjylland in the youth academy. And the only reason they added him was basically because the team needed an extra player. They couldn't find another player when the youth academy was formed. But his father was the kidman, and everyone within the club appreciated him for his efforts. So they decided to add this young man at the time to their roster as well. A couple of weeks into the season, right, all academy staff, all coaches were asked to write down on a piece of paper which players they thought had the greatest chance of succeeding at the professional level, right? And they put those names all separate from each other in different envelopes. And 5-6 years later, they opened up all those envelopes to see which coaches were actually right and which coaches were potentially wrong in their assessment at the time, but judging the players that they had in front of them when they were 15, 16 years of age. Now, lo and behold, none of the coaches, and there were quality coaches, with pro licenses, having coached at a high level for a long time, none of the coaches had this young man in their top 3, 4, and predicted that he would succeed. But yet, most of the players they had they thought that were going to succeed didn't succeed. But this young man, without anyone picking him out as a possible professional player, was one of the few to succeed. And better yet, he did better than anyone else mentioned. This young man at the time was 16 years of age, towards the end of puberty, so to speak. And no one was able to figure out or predict that he was going to succeed. And that's at 16 years of age. Just imagine now when we're talking about 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds, right? It's really hard to predict where they're going to be in a year from now. It's really hard to predict where they're going to be in 2 years from now, right? There's a lot of factors that influence that. Their overall attitude towards the game, how much do they on their own, support overall from the parents, how much do you watch the game, et cetera, other interests, other likes, whatever it is. It's really hard to predict where players end up in the long run. That's why from year to year, we go through this evaluation process, and it's quite a extensive process as well, to make sure that players from year to year are placed where they belong. And again, that's based on the information that we gather. Now, to back up this statement, I'll give you another one, and I've shared this during our last general meeting as well. I did a little bit of research on the 22 players that I found that are from Westfield on our UCFC teams, born 2005, so boys and girls born in 2005. I figured out where they were when they were U10. So that's in their second year of travel. Where were they, 6 years ago, if you will, 6 years ago, before they eventually ended up on the UCFC team. Now, we had 22 players. 7 of them were on the A team at U10. 3 of them were on the B team. 9 of them were on the C team. There's another 2 that were on the D team. And 1 of them was actually playing in the county program at the time, 6 years ago. Now, could we have predicted that this is how it was going to go? Absolutely not. All right, but it just shows you that out of the 22 players, less than a third or close to a third were on the A team. The other 15 weren't on an A team. So early success is not an indication of future success, right? There's a lot of factors impacting one's growth, and from year to year, we assess, evaluate our players to make sure we place them accordingly, based on the criteria that I shared with you earlier as well. Now, before I go into the different programs, if anyone has any questions about the selection process so far and the criteria used, please use the chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to assume that these criteria are clear. I'll show you towards the end of the presentation a couple of the evaluation forms that we use as part of the selection process. But again, before I go into the actual process broken down by year of birth, if anyone has any questions, make sure you use the chat right now. Otherwise, I'm just going to assume I've been very clear. All right, so again, the age group definitions used by US Soccer go by year of birth. So everything we do and everything I'm highlighting it does include the year of birth of the respective age groups, just so you have clarity here and what your child or children may have to do to be considered for travel next year. I see we have one question, so I'm just going to look at that really quick. All right, so the question in regards to the total number that qualify for travel, that largely depends on the year that we're talking about. Like, I can't give you an exact number off because it depends on the quality as well as the quantity, or better said, the quantity of players interested as well as the quality. Because you could have a group of 50 players interested with a good 40 to 45 of quality or ready for travel for that matter. You could also have a group of 70 players with only 30 to 35 ready to play travel for that matter. So it's hard to predict how many players exactly end up in the travel program in each year. All right, so I'm going to touch on the incoming U9s briefly. We did a town hall on the U9s last year, of last week. When I say last year, we did also one last year, but we did one last week. So I just want to go through this really quick for those that missed that one. So the pre-travel program already started on Friday, the 26th of March. They do 8 weeks, Friday and Saturday. We've had 2 weeks right now, if I'm not mistaken, because we skipped a week of spring break. This is for anyone that wants to be considered for U9 travel next fall. All right, we don't do separate tryouts. If you are born in 2013 and you want to be considered for travel, this is the program you need to be in. All right, and we have 2 sessions a week, 8 weeks long, and we gather information on our players at the end of every training session that we do. Based on the scores from those training sessions, we will determine where players are placed. All right, we do work with cohorts in this program. What that means is that we have set groups for a longer period of time. This is due to COVID, so we have to keep certain groups together for a longer period of time, because if we would mix and match consistently, and this applies to any of the other programs that we do as well, because I saw somebody ask the question, but if you have 100 kids out on the field and they mix every time they're out on the field, right, and somebody tests positive for COVID 2 days out, the entire group of 100 players has to quarantine for the required period. However, if you work in set groups of 10, 15 players, right, and we know what group these players are in, that certainly means only 10, 15 players at the quarantine versus the hundreds that I referred to earlier. All right, and this impacts not only the U8 pre-travel program, but also some of the other programs that we do. So U8 pre-travel program for the incoming U9s, 2013s. So the incoming U10s and U11s. So that means you're either born in 2012 or 2011. So we also started the week of March 22nd. The boys are actually on Mondays. The girls are on Tuesdays. Right. Again, that's also for 8 weeks. We now had 3 weeks so far. We still have 5 weeks left on this program as well. This is for current travel players. It replaces one of their weekly training sessions and open to all non-travel players that are interested in travel soccer for next year. All right, so historically, we would mix the groups and make sure players are playing with and against different players across the board. But this year, and I just alluded to that earlier, coaches rotate over the different groups. We're not mixing and matching all the groups for the reasons just mentioned, because if we have, say U10 boys on Monday from 3:30 to 5, we have 4 groups. If all those groups would be mixed consistently, then if anyone tests positive a few days out from the entire age group is out. Right, and it means none of the travel teams can play games for a little while. Anyone else needs to quarantine as well. So by keeping the group set and having teams, for example, train as a team for now, the risk is smaller, at least in case anything happens that they have to quarantine themselves. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure everyone is safe. We also want to make sure that the impact on the programs is as small as possible. So this is basically eliminating your risk. That being said, to make sure that all players are seen by all coaches in the age group, the coaches every Monday or Tuesday, depending if it's a boys or a girls program, will rotate over the different groups. All right, so sometimes you have to be creative. Sometimes you have to come up with new solutions given the challenge that you face. This works quite well. It takes away some of the things that we like about the Age Group Academy, but we're also hoping that if things get better as we progress, that we could do a few things like we've done in the past. So again, Age Group Academies for the incoming 2012s are, the 2012s are incoming U10s, as well the incoming U11s for the children born in 2011. All right, I want to make sure. All right. And somebody asked about the pre-travel program, or which is for the incoming U9s. You can still join. I'll give you our information in a little while so we can help you get sorted out as well. All right, so next age groups. Before I move on, by the way, if you're currently in travel, the pro coach and the head coach will also fill out a spring evaluation. I don't want to miss that, which provides us with 1 to 2 extra data points on all our players that are currently in travel. All right, so incoming U12s born in 2010 and incoming U13s born in 2009. If you're currently in travel, I will have our professional coach and our parent coach fill out a spring evaluation, which provides us with a couple data points right there. We've done several evaluation festivals, which we also use to get some additional information on our players. So putting all that together, we get quite a bit of information on the players already. And we have made sure that the professional coaches involved in these specific age group are exposed to the different teams. So again, the teams are staying as is, but the pro coaches are moving back and forth. So if I'm currently working in, I'll give you an example, U11 girls, which are our current, these are our 2010 girls. The coach of the A team has worked with the B team on a few occasions and will do so again, as well as the B team coach being exposed to the A team. All right, that way they can also figure out where all players place. Right, and this is a great way for them to get to know the entire age group. Right, so altogether, this provides us with a lot of information on all our players, and it's not just specific to the players that the coaches work with, because they get to see all the other players in the age group as well, which really helps figure out where all the players are that they work with. If you're a current non-travel player and interested in these age groups, we have an extra weekly practice session for you that started on the 26th of March as well. This is an 8-week program under the guidance of a couple of professional coaches assigned by us. You'll be evaluated based on the criteria shared earlier. All right. And those 8 weeks of training will provide us with additional data on you to determine if you're travel ready and where you would potentially place if you are travel ready. All right. If you are still interested and you're a non-travel player, you can still sign up, but you have missed a couple of weeks of the program already. But more than willing to include anyone else that's still interested. So again, travel players, this is what we do if you're currently 2010, 2009. And then if you are a non-travel player, this is what you would need to do to be considered for travel next year. By the way, with all these programs, and I've not yet mentioned it, but taking part in any other program doesn't guarantee anyone a place in travel next year. But we are trying to do the best we can to gather the information and the data that we need to help place players accordingly. Sorry about that. Last but not least, we have our incoming U14s born in 2008 and our incoming U15s born in 2007. All right, so on our current travel players, the professional head coach's site will complete a spring evaluation, which is one data point. If you're a non-travel player, we will invite you to a couple of practice sessions, or you can come to a couple of practice sessions with the current team or teams for that matter, right, which helps us determine where you would potentially place if there would be a spot in travel come the fall 2021. All right, so this is a little shorter, but what we also try to do across the board is limit the impact on our training and game schedule, because the spring is busy. When it comes to youth soccer, there's a lot of games to be played. The weather sometimes doesn't work in our favor. For example, there's rain forecasted for the next couple of days. If you're not on turf, that may impact your ability to run sessions, etc. But teams can train and play accordingly. We can get the evaluations done within in the environment that we've already created, and we also know that some of the kids are still involved in other sports in the spring as well. So we're trying to do the best we can given the limitations that we're dealing with. All right, before I go into questions, there's two things I want to share with you, just so everyone knows how we go about it. I'm going to share two different documents with you. The first one I'm going to share with you is an example evaluation form that we fill out on all our travel players. So hopefully you guys can see this screen. Maybe Eric, can you confirm that you can see this now?
Yes, can see it.
Perfect. So this is a mock one, just so you know, but this is a player evaluation that we fill out on all our travel players. So a professional coach and potentially the parent head coach, depending on the team that we're talking about, will fill out this evaluation, right, on all the players that he or she works with. So the first three categories are the ones I discussed earlier. Communication is really understanding of the game. Decision making is your ability to act accordingly on what happens around you. And execution, right, is basically technique. Right, so those are the first three categories that I referenced earlier when we talked about criteria. Players are graded in each category from 1 through 4, right? Then we talk about commitment. Commitment is a combination of some of the factors that I mentioned earlier as well. It's not just showing up, but also making the most of the sessions as well, which is something we're obviously interested in knowing. Then you get a total, an average, which gets you to a ranking. And there's two other columns that are part of each evaluation as well. When we have players that play goalie, and especially as kids get older, U11, U12, but beyond U12, especially U13, U14, we also ask for a goalkeeper rank. And then one category that everyone fills out as well, as shown here, we ask for a recommendation on each specific player. So for example, this example over here, Luke Shaw, as you can tell, he's struggling a little bit, especially his commitment is a challenge. It's not just, again, the fact that he doesn't always show up, but he may not be making the most of the practice sessions. All right. The coach recommends him to be dropped. All right. And the explanation is given here in the general comments as well. So this is something that we ask from all the coaches that fill out these evaluations. You could also recommend someone to be promoted. Right. I just made, as I said, this is a mock one, but again, a comment to back up the statement. And some just may be good where they are right now. Again, that one coach potentially recommends somebody to be dropped or be promoted for the matter doesn't mean someone is going to be promoted. Just like being placed in the top third of your team doesn't guarantee you a move up, because there's a lot of different factors coming in place as well. For example, do you score better than the players that are ahead of you, assuming that you aren't on the A team, for example? Say you're on the C team and you're in the top third of your team. Does your data show that you're better than the players on the B team? That is definitely a factor that plays a role as well. So these are the evaluations completed on current travel players. Now, another evaluation I want to share with you is the WSA spring assessment that we complete in all the academies that we have. All right. So again, if you show up for the U8 pre-travel program, or you show up for the age group academies on Mondays or Tuesdays for the incoming U10s and U11s, even for the incoming U12s and U13s that are non-travel currently on Fridays, we use this evaluation form. All right. As you can tell, it's based on one's name, one jersey's number. That's why we give away those shirts with a number on it, makes it a little easier. And again, the same categories. Now, this form is actually especially for the specifically for our age group academies on Mondays and Tuesdays with our current U9s and U10s, because there's a greater explanation of what we're looking for from our players in those age groups. Right, our session plans are based around all this as well. So players are training, hopefully provide an opportunity to get better. But along the way, we're also working out how well they're doing in these different areas. So we talked about execution, and I mentioned it earlier. Are the players comfortable on the ball under pressure? When it comes to when we talk about decision making, right? Does a player understand when to pass and when to dribble, which is a big thing at U9 and U10 as well. Can a player find space, create space? That's a combination of decision making as well as awareness or communication. All right, and we talk about creating an opening or seeing an opening for that matter. So this is a spring academy assessment, and the setup of this is the same for U8, U9, current U8s, but 2013s, 2012s, 2011s, and we even use it for the non-travel players born 2009 and 10. All right, so going back to the slide presentation, I'm just going to share my contact information as well as the contact information from both our VPs of travel. All right, I'll leave it up for a little bit. I did notice that a couple of people already had some questions, so I'm just going to tune in and read through those questions really quick, hoping that I can answer those. All right, so how can you possibly evaluate the non-travel players if they aren't playing with the existing travel players? If the existing travel players, so I'll give you an example, the current U9s, incoming U10s born in 2012, if you have a group of 10, 12 non-travel players interested in travel, they can still be evaluated. Granted, it's with that group of players at this point in time, but they can still be evaluated. And depending on where we end up, right, if we, for example, have spots to fill in the travel program, those that do well in that group, right, through scoring well consistently in that specific group, there may be opportunities for them to join the travel program as well. So as stated before, there are some limitations, unfortunately, that we're facing. In an ideal world, you mix and match all the players, but given that we're still dealing with the COVID protocols and guidelines, that's unfortunately not very feasible. That's not feasible right now. But again, that is to deal with the challenge that we face and making the best of what we have. Right, my daughter, you tennis playing time. All right, so for specific questions and signups, either email us or go to our website, westfieldnjsoccer.com. There's a specific link to the travel team selection page explaining everything and what you need to do to be considered for travel next year. All right, so people are asking questions about the number of teams that we're going to form. That depends on a variety of things. For example, with the 2012s, we formed 3 teams, depending on interest as well as standard across the board. We would like to continue with 3 teams, obviously. Can we form 4 teams? It's a little early to say so at this point in time, because it's a combination of interest as well as ability. I mean, that you have a certain number of players trying out doesn't mean that all these players are travel ready. Because if some of the players don't score too high in some of the categories, you may have the quantity, but potentially not the quality yet. And that goes along with something I said earlier about being ready and being evaluated from year to year to determine what your needs are. Because one needs can change from year to year. Okay. You know, and that's not just based on ability, but it could also be an interest, for example. I did see a follow-up in regards to comments on the 2012 Academy. It is a tryout because this is a means for us to evaluate players that are interested to play in travel. And this is the best means for us to get consistent information on, as well as these players being exposed to the different coaches that work in the age group currently. So all our travel coaches that work in the 2012 age group are working with all the different teams and rotate around. So if I would be the coach of what's currently the A team, I get to work with the B team players, the C team players, as well as the non-travel players to work out the overall strength in the age group, as well as where individual players are. So they may not always be exposed to, the players may not always be exposed to one another, but they're exposed to all coaches who can determine where all players are. Are there any other questions? I see something coming in right now. Wow. So, okay. So a follow-up to the question in regards to number 2012s, I would say there is an uptick, but that, you know, in interest, I would argue, but that still doesn't help us determine whether or not we are going to have 3 or 4 teams, because there's a few other important pieces that are going to impact that as well. All right, there's another question coming in. All right, so if anyone has any questions, this is obviously your opportunity to ask. If not, please use the information shared below. You can reach out specific to either the VP of Girls or Boys Travel. You can also reach out to me. What I'm going to do right now, well, I'm going to stop sharing really quick. I'll share the link to all the travel team selection information with you really quick as well, so you can find it and hopefully get an answer to other questions you may have as well. If you have no other questions, I want to thank you very much for tuning in tonight. We appreciate. Right. I certainly see a few more questions, so I'll answer them quickly. Thank you, Matt, for doing what I want to do as well. So somebody's asking about the academy versus coach evaluations. We don't necessarily weigh one heavier than the other. I would argue that we actually look for trends. As I stated earlier, you know, if one coach recommends a player to be promoted, for example, but the other coach doesn't, or the academy scores don't show someone to be ready for promotion, given the scores, then someone is just not ready to be promoted. That's mostly what we're looking for, consistency across the board. And often the trends always point in the same direction, because if someone is ready to be promoted, we get that information through a variety of sources. It's often a professional coach showing that, a parent coach may show that as well, and the academy scores show that one is ready to be promoted. It's not an exact science where one weighs much heavier than the other. And is there going to be an additional travel tryout after the festival evaluations? So I'm guessing this is in regards to the current U11 and U12s, or the incoming U12s and U13s, so 2010s and 2009s. If that is the case, right now we're collecting information through. So we gather information through the travel evaluations. We have gathered information through the festivals that we did, and we are making sure that the different coaches in an age group, where possible, are exposed to the different teams as well, to help them in the process to work out where all players are, not just the players on their team, but in general. Because if I work with a B team and I know the strength of the A and the C team, it helps place the players that I work with on the B team much greater. So the evaluations that we do on our current travel players, very good question. The evaluations due on the current travel players in the spring are for internal use, because they include data that help us with team selection. Now, if you want more information on where your son or daughter is, you can easily speak to your professional coach, who can definitely give you more feedback on your son's or daughter's development, in line with hopefully the end of fall evaluation that you received at the end of the fall in 2020. All right. some very good questions asked, by the way. So what if you miss the initial travel festival? Good question again. So I hope, the one thing I hope that I've clarified now, that especially if you're in travel, but even if you're a non-travel player, we're trying to get as much information on our players. So if you had missed, for example, an evaluation festival for a very good reason, then there's other means for us to assess, evaluate players. And if you're currently in travel, it's not just a one-day event that's going to determine where you're going to end up. We look at the overall development of a player from the start of the fall all the way through where we are right now into the end of May, basically. So missing an evaluation festival, assuming it was for good reasons, injury, illness, whatever it may have been, is not the end all, and we have other means to get information on a player. All right. So if you have no further questions, I appreciate everyone tuning in for tonight's event. I hope you have more clarity on the process. I hope you got information that you found useful. If not, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Most importantly of all, I don't want to keep you here any longer than necessary. I'm sure you have plenty of other things going on. So I want to thank you and wish you a good night, and hope to see you I hope to see you out on the field very soon as well. Granted, it still needs to be social distance, but at least we're able to play. All right, I'll talk to you soon.